There are a lot of myths about education, a lot of things that are considered common wisdom that you hear repeated over and over again that simply aren't true or are wild exaggerations. And one of them is the idea that our schools, and specifically our public schools, are failing. You hear it said in all kinds of different ways. Some people will say our top schools with our top students are doing wonderfully, but the other schools are doing terribly and they're failing. Then they'll segue into the idea that public education is failing. They'll go to the idea that this is government schools and that's bad, that's something terrible and we've got to get rid of those and go to more school choice. Well, the fact is our schools aren't failing. They're not all doing as well as we wish, but they're not failing, especially if you put them in context. So I've got a bit of information here. Let's look at the IQ of our children today. Our children today have an IQ that's approximately 10 points higher than their parents, or they're possibly beyond that about 30 years ago. Every year, students have gained about 1/3 of a point in IQ, and they've had to actually raise the bar in a sense and make today's 110 be the same as 100 was 30 years ago. Our dumb kids, in quote, seem to be smarter than we are. Now, whether that's attributed to schools or to other factors, I don't know. But this is not a problem of our kids not being smart enough. Well, how do you check? How do you figure out if our students are doing better than they used to? We've only really got one decent measure, and that is the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Everybody from the left to the right says if there's only one test you're going to look at, that's a test you can look at. And it's been around since about 1970. Well, today's 9-year-old, in other words, today's 4th grader, scores in math about the way that the 6th graders did 30 years ago. In other words, they're scoring 2 years higher than people were 30 years ago. That, to me, doesn't sound like people who are failing. That sounds like a school that is doing well and actually moving forward. The reading scores haven't gone up as much, the scores for the older kids, but still, they haven't at all gone down. Well, are we failing the kids who are at the bottom? They're moving up as well. Everybody's moving up. As a matter of fact, if you look at the gap between Anglo students and minority students, specifically African American and Hispanic, that gap has been closing, meaning that we're not only doing well raising scores towards the top, we're doing well raising scores from the bottom as well. Okay, but then there's a question, how are we doing internationally? And a lot of people believe that we're doing horribly internationally. They've heard it being said, and they're sure we're way at the bottom. Even at the worst scores, the U.S. is dead in the middle of the industrialized countries. That means Europe and Asia. They're right in the middle there. But you know what? That was a test in 2009. If we go to a test more recently, the 6th grade reading in this school, in this country, we scored, let me get that back again. We scored 6th in reading in the country on the 2011 test. That means we scored higher than Denmark, higher than England, higher than Canada, the Netherlands, Sweden, Germany. In math, we came in 10th. We came in 9th in science. It would be great to be first, but those aren't examples of schools that are failing. If you look at a single state, Massachusetts actually came in 2nd in the world in science. In different places in the country, you can find all kinds of success stories. There's a wonderful quote too. Singapore seems to be coming in top, and most of the countries who are coming in better than us, higher than us, I should say, are the Asian countries. Well, it happens, by the way, that Asian students in America, Asian Americans, tend to score similarly to students in Asian countries. So is it the schools? Is it something cultural? We're not failing those students, certainly. They're doing as well as their compatriots. And as a matter of fact, European American students here do similar to what they do in Europe as well. But in Singapore, which has been coming in the highest of all the countries in the world lately, the Singapore's Minister of Education, who should be singing the praises of the country, said, you know, we may have an exam meritocracy here in Singapore. We may be doing better than you in exams, but you in the U.S., you have a talent meritocracy. You create innovation. You create students who can think, people who can be creative, people who can take risks. And that's why educators from Asia frequently visit the U.S. and they ask, how do you do it? How do you get people to take risks, to take chances, to try new things? We're not as good at it as you are. So I look at all these things, and I can look at the other information I get about the schools failing as well, and I say, you know, on balance, we're certainly not failing. Are we succeeding where we want to be? Absolutely not. But we're holding our own in the world. We're doing better than we were doing 30 years ago. And to me, that's fairly good news.
I agree, Dave. And I think what's interesting about the international figures is that they show that actually in terms of educating disadvantaged children, we're making much bigger strides than some of the international countries that we're constantly compared to. But what we don't take into account when we look at how we're faring internationally is that poverty plays a huge factor in the United States because we have a large percentage of our children living in poverty. And in Arizona, that is also a huge factor. We're fifth in the nation in terms of child poverty. And so when you can equalize related to poverty, we're not doing as poorly as some people would like for you to believe. And I think the danger in this sort of fear factor that's instilled in people based on, you know, we're falling behind, we're not going to be able to compete, is that it is pushing us more closely to more and more standardized tests and more focus on standardized testing, when what you're hearing from some of the countries that do well on these tests is it's not just about testing. It's about something else, maybe not quite as quantifiable, and it's a curiosity that we don't want to drill out of our students. But the people who are sort of the fear mongers about we're falling behind, what is their usual remedy? It is more accountability, more testing, when in fact we're hearing from other countries that that is not the direction that they're headed in. They're moving away from that direction and trying to figure out what we do that works.
To be honest, other countries should be delighted that we're pushing more testing, because what we're doing is we're telling students there's one right answer. Out of 5 choices, there's one right answer, and so you better learn that right answer, and you better learn how to do exactly what the test says you're doing and not think for yourself. And it's thinking for yourself is that great American spirit of entrepreneurship and invention and basically making up as we go along, which is what the U.S. tends to do so well. That's what gives us our energy. It takes away from some of the other stuff. No education system is perfect. But as you were saying, if you go cohort to cohort, one group to another group, and you compare us to other countries, we fare very, very equitably. And one thing that other countries do, I should say, is when they have a school that's not doing as well, they put in more money. They put in more specialists. They give the teachers more time for preparation and training. And lo and behold, they raise their students' scores, their achievement. What do? We say you're a failing school. We're going to cut you off, basically cut off the funds.
It's dangerous, and I think that we're moving more and more toward a punitive system where we are going to punish the underperforming schools without acknowledging that there is a direct correlation many times between poverty and schools that are not faring as well. And when they may need what you're talking about, more help, longer school years, more tutoring, that takes more money. But the dialogue in Tucson, or not in Tucson, in Arizona, is very much punitive. Let's shut them down, let's fire the teachers, let's fire the principal, and that may or may not be what the problem is, but we're not willing to dig deeper, and we're just going to resort to punitive tactics.
I heard someone recently say our schools aren't failing, they're ailing. Some of the some of the schools are definitely ailing, but they can be repaired. Fail says you've got to throw it out, and that's absolutely not the right way to go.
I agree.